Vacancy Legal Recruitment, a refreshingly unique and personal talent agency developed specifically for legal. Dedicated to the sector and with extensive experience working across legal services and legal technology, we bridge the gap between your requirements and top-tier legal talent. Get in touch today and say hello at vacancy.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello and welcome along to the latest Today's Family Lawyer podcast. Today we welcome Dan Warburton, a previous guest on the podcast and a law firm growth consultant. We've talked previously, Dan, about the work that you do in working with firms to help them become more profitable whilst doing less work. Today, though, we're going to be talking about a new book that you've launched, which puts a lot of what you've done over the past few years with firms in particular into practice. So great to have you on the podcast. Really interested to hear about the content of the book as well. Thanks so much for joining.
It's great to be here. Always a pleasure speaking to you.
Well, first of all, those who haven't listened to the first podcast you did with us, and I recommend they do because it was very good, tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Dan Warburton and I'm a law firm growth consultant with a specialism in delegation, or what I call profitable delegation. And the reason is because a law firm owner, from becoming qualified whilst being an associate and being a partner, at no stage are they taught how to effectively delegate away their workload. Most law firm partners and owners are in a situation where they've had clients for years that keep relying on them to do the billable work. And now we're approaching the greatest transfer of wealth between generation in history, from the baby boomers to Gen Z and the millennials. With a transfer of wealth comes a transfer of responsibility. But if the responsibility hasn't been transferred, what happens to that wealth? And if you couple that macro movement that's happening in the legal spaces, you've got all these law firm owners and partners in their 50s and 60s that are burnt out, exhausted, tired, want to retire or sell their firm, but they can't because a firm still relies on them to operate. And even if they wanted to retire, they've now got to pay anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5 times their PI insurance cover, which most of them do not have that kind of money. And so they're in a situation where they're trapped in a firm, which is like a sinking ship that they've got to drown with. And it's happening on a massive scale across the UK. And so in seeing this, I've realized that the key that frees law firm owners from that dynamic to be able to really profit from all the work they've got coming in whilst getting their life back is learning how to delegate. Like, delegation is the number one most profitable skill a law firm owner or partner can learn. And yet I don't see this talked about much or spoken about. People talk about succession planning, you know, and you hear these law firm owners go to a succession planning meeting or a succession planning weekend away, but then rolls around Monday, nothing changes. They don't do anything about it. They don't implement it. Why? Well, because what's missing is they don't have the skill of delegating their workload away from their clients that they've had for years to their team members. And so I've written this book called Delegate Now to Supercharge Your Profits, how law firm owners can massively boost their profits while reducing their workload, with the aim of giving this knowledge to law firm owners in how they can do exactly that, make shed loads more money whilst delegating their workload away so that they get their time and their life back to either do the work they enjoy or just get a good night's sleep or take their wife out for a meal in the evening.
This is a topic that, as I say, you've been on the podcast talking about before, and I seem to remember when we were chatting about it, I used the example of my own family where my dad was a GP, my mum is a teacher. They both scaled their respective professions by being good at what they do, being a good GP, being a good teacher, but not necessarily being given the skills along the way to enable them to make those transitions into what is effectively management. This is something that you recognise day in, day out in the law.
Exactly that. They've built their profession based on their knowledge and their ability. And never have they thought, how can I transfer this knowledge and ability onto somebody else and take a cut of the profit?
You've talked about the fact that you've written the book. Tell us about where that came from. What makes you in particular, Dan, an authority, a credible authority, to talk to firm owners about this skill?
So I've been in intensive management leadership training now for over 20 years. I've now worked with over 1,000 entrepreneurs, business owners in many different sectors. 5 years ago, from doing a marketing program, my mentor at the time said, you can't just work with anyone. Write a list of all the people you've worked with and see which one got the best result. And sure enough, it was law firm owners and partners that got the best result. And then when I looked into it, it's because I discovered that there is no management and leadership training in the legal sector. So that became my niche ever since 5 years ago. And since then, I've had clients achieving results anywhere from sort of 20% revenue increase for the larger firms to 392% revenue increase that we've spoken about before. That was Kate got that result through working with me. Huge revenue increases. But you could say, okay, wow, well done. You managed to work evenings, night times and weekends to achieve that. No, all of my clients have over half their workload, and many of them have completely removed themselves from having to do any billable work whatsoever within a year, whilst massively increasing their profits. And it's completely transformed their lives. It's set them free. Only last week, one of my clients was on tears. He said to me, I'm so happy. I'll get evenings with my wife now. I'll get to have weekends with my kids, and I'm able to grow the firm in the way that I want to because I'm around to be able to grow it. He's able to go out on those nice lunches with those ideal clients to go and win the business that he really wants to win and go for the bigger deals. And it's just completely transformed his life. And it's so heartwarming to see. It's just wonderful.
How do we deal with this challenge, I guess, that perhaps you face, which is that I'm the only person that can go and do this job? As you said at the start, you've built your firm based on your reputation, based on your skill. Ultimately, how do we encourage that transition over from, well, this is not my skill that's delivering this now, this is the delegated or the skills of those that I'm delegating this work to that will ultimately go and deliver this work?
It all starts with first choosing that new future. You can either choose to keep doing what you're doing now, and you need to firstly wake up and get that your future is more of what you're doing now. If you're already working 60, 70 hours a week or more, that's just going to be the same forever. And then one day when you get too old, which you will do, we all get too old, you won't feel like working like that. And then what are you going to do with your firm? What are you going to do with your position? And it can take years to find the right people to delegate to. And also it can happen very quickly if you're highly committed. But the first thing is to realize, okay, I've got to do something about this. Otherwise, I am on a sinking ship. You need to start giving people, firstly, the opportunity to be trusted. It all starts with that. And the way that you gain people's trust is by giving trust, is by giving other people the chance to be trusted. And so it's about first scheduling one-on-one calls with your key team members. Who are the heads of department? Who are those that are the main drivers of performance across your firm? And then on the first weekly one-on-one is asking them, look, you've been at this firm so many years and I've never asked you, why are you here? What would you love to succeed at? And then really get in their world. One of my clients did this with his head of department. He found out that one of them wanted to travel to India and wanted a month off in summer. Another one wanted singing lessons but needed Friday mornings off. Another one, he was surprised, did want to become partner and get pay rises and things like that. All this, he didn't know at all about his heads of department. And he was amazed to get to know them like that. But then the next stage is then to say to each of them, okay, I want to mentor you week by week to succeed at these things that matter to you. But for that to happen, I need you to dial in for a weekly one-on-one call with me. And we're going to set some targets that you need to hit within the firm, that with you hitting those is going to make you achieving all these things that matter to you possible. This guy is going to get his month off in summer to travel around India. The guy that wanted singing lessons has got up Friday mornings off, and they've rejigged things around, so now he can really enjoy his singing. And then the one that wants the partnership position, they're getting clear onto exact metrics he needs to achieve to make partner, which are very steep, but if he makes them, it's going to really be profitable for the firm. But as a byproduct of this, what happens is the employees become very loyal They think, wow, I've got this boss that mentors me every week to succeed at everything that matters to me, both succeeding in my personal life, but also in hitting all these targets. And every week he dials in for this one-on-one, and he gives me training and support and all these things. That's the way into it. It's like you need to actually schedule time to delegate. If you don't have scheduled time to delegate, the delegating doesn't even happen. And so it's about getting really structured about it, creating this real team and teamwork with each important individual in your team that you're going to mentor them to succeed at everything. And then after a month or two of doing that, then what you do is you request each head of department does the same with each of their team members. So in the end, you have everybody across the entire firm has one other person on a weekly basis that's taken them through a mentoring session to succeed at everything. And this creates this amazing supportive network across the firm. And then the boundaries of whether people work on site or off site starts to get really blurred, because everybody's clear on when they're dialing in and then what's going to be covered on those sessions. They're going to be clear on the request that's been made of them and agreeing deadlines. So these are the other secrets, is making clear requests, and a clear request is only a clear request when it has an exact instruction of what you want doing and a time frame. And so that's when you make those and you agree those time frames and what needs to be done week by week, and then week by week you can track their performance. It sounds simple, and yet I find a lot of law firm owners think, oh God, but I've got 7 heads of department. That means that's 7 one-on-one calls a week. But what they don't understand is that once you have those weekly one-on-ones, you then make a request of each head of department that, unless necessary, like if they need to because of workflow and it's going to stop workflow, to just not contact them. Don't text me, don't call me, don't email me unless this will affect workflow, and do your best to just save everything for that weekly one-on-one. What happens then is you get so many less interruptions, so many less demands, so much less put on your plate. You end up with these big windows of time that start to free up where you can focus on doing, if you really have to, your own billable work, but more to the point, going out recruiting, going finding ideal new candidates, putting them underneath in the divisions or the departments where the support is needed. And you're just freed up to start doing all the things that positively make a firm so much more profitable. Or you can just choose to work a bit less and actually enjoy the pace of your workload.
Some of what you've described there sounds very micro-managery, which people are quite averse to in this day and age. The other thought that comes to mind is that you still, as an owner, as a partner, as the sort of top of that tree, it still feels like you still need to know about all of the stuff that's going on, whereas there is a school of thought that says we have to empower people to make more of those decisions themselves, so that you're not the one that knows all the answers.
So in regards to the micromanaging is where you ask somebody to do something and then you don't set an agreement or a deadline, and then you keep checking in by text. How are you doing? How's it going? Or you phone them up, or you send them an email, or you agree a deadline, and before that deadline, you're doing the same again. You're texting, you're calling, you're emailing, how's it going? How's it going? Or can I take that work back off you? Or shall I do this bit for you? That's micromanaging. Having a weekly one-on-one call is not micromanaging, because it's a conversation about what's going to be happening and by when, making an agreement, and then not communicating at all until that deadline has been crossed. If it's crossed and the work hasn't been delivered, that's it. So you're giving people complete autonomy on delivering what they say they'll do by when they say they'll do it. And in fact, how do you know, if you don't give people the chance to do that, how good their performance is? If you keep micromanaging and they get the work done, well, how do you know that that's not because of you constantly pestering them, or whether that's them under their own autonomy getting that done on their own? So then you never know in your team who you can rely on and who you can't. That's the point. You're not giving them a chance to be trusted. Your second point, which was, so you still feel like you need to know everything. Well, what happens is during those one-on-one sessions is you don't advise, you lead. So advising is where you have the answers and you give the answers and you give the solutions. Instead, you lead. You say, okay, well done for bringing that to me this week. What do you think the answer is? And what could you do? And what else? What did you do last time? What worked? What didn't work? And so what you're doing is, in a coaching style dialogue, is you're guiding them to find the solutions, find the answers. And then what will happen is, week by week, they build up their ability to respond. And as their responsibility rises and rises, the weight off your shoulder gets lighter and lighter and lighter. But it's only by checking in on that weekly one-on-one basis that you get to hear where are they at, what are they dealing with, what challenges are they facing. And you need to know that. But when somebody's really earned your trust, those calls can just be 15 minutes. And then if they're really flying and running a whole head of department, well, you could just have one call a month if you really wanted to. But I always say start off with a weekly one-on-one call.
There is an assumption in some of what you've said, and presumably this is an element of the work that you do with people, which is that they can mentor in the first place. And again, go back to what we've said about those management skills, the fact that people aren't always given the knowledge and the information that they need to make that transition into a management, into a mentoring sort of role. We've got to make sure that these people have got those skills before we let them loose. Even in ourselves as law firm owners and partners, I'm not convinced that without some input I could go and do that particularly effectively at the outset.
Yeah, well said. And the point is you can't force somebody to do something that they don't like or they don't feel like doing or they don't feel is their thing. You know, the truth is some partners in a firm are just going to want to be left alone to do billing work, and that needs to be respected. You can't then ask them to go and start managing other team members and doing all this if that's all they want to do. However, if there is no management of the general team members, then that's where you just get people drifting. They don't get work delegated to them. They don't get to prove themselves. They then don't get the career progression they want. And so then they just leave and try to find a job somewhere else. And we all know that the turnover in the legal sector is pretty damn high. One of the main reasons is they don't get this attention and one-on-one time to really excel and improve at what they do. Coming back to what you're saying, yeah, not everybody has got this mentoring spirit in them as such. And it's those that are particularly entrepreneurial and courageous and willing to lean into those awkward conversations that are going to be the ones that find themselves as able to mentor effectively. But I think one of the other biggest mistakes or assumptions that law firm owners have is that they're supposed to have the answers and know the answers. But actually it's not. It's the not knowing the answers and being okay with not knowing the answers is what gives you the confidence to just be in conversation and not advise, but lead, to guide people to find the solutions and find the answers themselves.
So at the risk of giving away all of your trade secrets, Dan, you've now written a book all about this information, and it's available for people obviously to read. What examples have you got where you've been able to help firms on this journey?
One of my favorite case studies is Carlos in the USA. He was working over 100 hours a week. He was completely exhausted and burnt out, and he was the managing partner alongside his other partner of this 9-person firm. He just got to the point where he didn't know what to do. I was referred to him. We got into conversation, and he told me how he was also receiving 250 text messages a day from his team members wanting to know, how do I do this? Where do I save this file? What to do with this client? What to do with that? And unbelievable, 250 text messages a day from just like 8 other people. It was nuts. And when we got into working together, what we realized was missing was that he wasn't making clear requests, in the sense of he thought that the way that he got his team members to cooperate was to show them how exhausted and tired he was and having to do too much, and hoping that they would then pick up the pieces and help him. But it didn't happen. And it always reminds me that of my mum. My mum always said, why do I always have to do the bloody housework around here? I'm always doing the cleaning, the ironing, the washing. And I said, Mum, why don't you just ask us? What would you like me to do? She said, I shouldn't have to ask you. Then she walks out. And the same thing would happen again and again and again. It was only when I hit university that I actually started cooking and taking care of a kitchen and myself. But, because I had to. In exactly this instance, Carlos just wasn't making clear requests of his team members. But more to the point, he was avoiding agreeing a deadline. And the reason was because he didn't want to upset anyone. He wanted to have a law firm with a great company culture. But great company culture isn't a culture that's void of stress and people not being demanded of. In fact, quite the contrary. People that really lit up and feel inspired are when they're challenged with deadlines and go for them, and then are managed in a supportive and compassionate way to succeeding at achieving those deadlines. That's what creates a great culture. So we got to work, and the first thing we started to implement was these regular one-on-one calls with each of his team members. And this was all of them at the beginning. And then making clear requests, agreeing deadlines, and then not advising but leading, not giving them the answers, requesting that they didn't contact him unless necessary, that they brought each query to the call. And through this, he went from receiving 250 text messages to around 10 in about 2 weeks. And then he realized this weekly call was really good, because whenever he made requests of his team members, he knew the team members were sweating, knowing, hang on a minute, I've got to speak to Carlos in the next 3 days. Let me go and have a look at what I'd agreed to do. And they would go and do everything that they said they would do before speaking to him, instead of facing the embarrassment of saying, I haven't done this. So he very quickly started to notice an increase in performance between all his team members. Then we looked at his billable targets, and they were a bit high. So we reduced them down to 100 per fee earner per month. And then each was supported to ensure they were hitting their targets. And after 6 months of doing this, we looked at his finances, and we compared the last 6 months of 2023 versus the last 6 months of 2022. And his firm had made an extra 89% profit. So that was an extra $707,000, which is great, nice. But the best thing is he got his hours down to less than 50 a week. The key was realizing that he was still doing a lot of billable work. So it was key to go out and actually find somebody that was a senior solicitor that could handle the commercial law work that he was doing. And his name was Jonathan. And then in hiring him and then putting him also straight onto the regular one-on-one weekly calls, was able to delegate his workload away, check in with him that he had everything he needed. And within only a few weeks, he was really up to speed and taking a huge weight of the work off Carlos' shoulders. But now Carlos he's got evenings with his family. He loves skiing, so he gets to go skiing much more often. In the last year, he's now taken on another 3 partners and another 10 employees, something like that. But the point I've seen where law firm owners start to massively succeed is when they replace themselves from doing their heaviest billable work in a way that's reliable and profitable. Because then all of a sudden, they've got all their workload covered and profit, plus nearly all their time back, to then go and supporting the rest of the team members even more, looking at acquiring new work, going out recruiting, and enjoying business development lunches and all these things.
You've alluded to the fact that staff retention is one of the biggest challenges that firms face, and indeed it sort of often ranks quite highly in sort of most sentiment surveys that are out there at the moment. Do you see that this style of management is part of a firm's recruitment and retention policy? You talked about the fact that people are often left adrift and that's why they leave. Talk about things like social welfare or having mental health and wellness support for staff. Is this another tool in a firm's armory to aid with their recruitment and retention, having a very proactive approach to this?
Absolutely, because in the one-on-one sessions, the art is to create an environment where individuals feel that they can never get anything wrong. And that's one of the favorite sentences that my clients write down on a stick-it note, is that there is never anything wrong, there is only ever something missing. And so in these conversations, when you say to the delegate, have you done this? Yes, great. Have you done this? Yes. Have you done this? And they say no. You say, okay, well, that's fine. Remember, there's never anything wrong. There's only something missing. What is it that's missing that had you not be able to do that on time? And what can I do to help you with that? And it might be you need to upgrade the system. They might need more work delegating to them. It could be all sorts of things. But when you base this completely anger-free, no judgment placed upon the individual style of communicating, you create an environment where people can really speak their minds. They can say, to be honest, I'm going through a divorce right now. It's really hard. I've got this night. And then you can guide them, say, okay, well, look, have you got a support network around this? Are you speaking to someone at the moment? What's particularly on your mind, and who do you need to speak to get this sorted? You're just guiding them to find the answers themselves. But when you do that, you're basically giving them a safe space to then what could become the beginning of a mental problem, a mental imbalance. If you get angry or you lose your temper or you show signs of frustration with somebody, it will cause them to shut down and not be able to speak openly to you. And then you don't know what they're really dealing with. You won't know that their computer keeps crashing. You won't know that their clients are actually really irate and unhappy with the firm's work because this associate won't have the courage to actually speak to you because you lose your temper with them. The structure of the regular one-on-one calls is just a structure. Within the calls, there needs to be implemented advanced communication skills, advanced management and leadership to be able to get the best out of people. I have this dynamic, I have this problem with this individual, and it'd be easy to just fire them, be easy to get rid of them, easy to just block them and send them to HR, whatever it is. But actually, if you stand back and think, what would be the very, very best outcome from this? And I guarantee it would be if they were able to see the mistake they made, took responsibility for it, gave a suggestion of what they're going to implement to make sure it doesn't happen again, went and cleared up that mess with the client and their colleagues, and then went and implemented the change. And within a month from now, they've become a completely different human being that's more reliable and loyal to the firm's vision than ever before. And if you can speak to people in that skillful way that has people go through that process and become amazing team members, well, doesn't that save you the headache of firing someone and having to rehire and retrain and re-get on board and all that headache that goes with it? Of course it would. And so, yes, this will absolutely increase retention of employees.
I would urge people to go back and listen to the first podcast that we did, because whilst we've covered a little bit of similar ground, I think you've expanded on some of what we talked about previously. It's been great to have you on the podcast as ever, Dan. Thank you so much for joining, sharing your insight and imparting some wisdom.
Thank you so much. A pleasure as always.
The Today's Family Lawyer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk. My thanks to Dan. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.